So I will just start with a few words, and then we'll show. Okay. Just trying to remove something. Good. Well, when I was asked to deliver a talk on the summer course, it's not the first time, but I haven't been there since long ago. I was quite glad. I was a little bit sad that we cannot do it face to face, but it's okay anyway. And the first thing I even asked Erzy, what do you mean by restoration? Because some of it seems obvious, but it was not so clear to me what you mean by it. Do you mean to restore it because it's not in good state of conservation? Do you mean to conserve it or preserve, which is the American way of saying conserve? Or reconstructions. Do we speak of conservation of reconstructions, which are not so acceptable, but still there are many of them, whether complete or partial? Or are we talking about maintenance, protection, prevention? Maintenance for me is a preventive measure of conservation and should be for most of us. So I discussed it a little bit with Erzy, but later I discussed it with myself. It took me some time to decide what do I want to talk about exactly. Because the obvious thing that comes to mind in preserving thing which is not anymore authentic or let's say original. There is a difference between authentic and original according to World Heritage definitions. So one thing which comes to mind are classical reconstructions which became already icons, like the Minoan temple in Knossos in Greece, reconstructed by Sir Evans after excavation. This is already a very famous facade reconstructed. This is a room reconstructed, including wall paintings, and there are many other and more. On the World Heritage list, we have very few because there was a decision that only the center of historic Warsaw, reconstructed after the Second World War, would be accepted as a reconstructed site. But later, many years later, the bridge of Mostar being damaged during the Civil War, there was a question, can it be on the World Heritage? It was presented for World Heritage before even being repaired. And there was a long discussion. It was, I think, in Durban in South Africa. Is it okay? From my point of view, and I was glad that it was accepted, certainly it is fine, because in this case, the symbolic value, not only the architecture, not only the visual, not only the historic, but the symbolic value of a bridge, and most in the Slavic languages is a bridge. So the bridge was so important that so what if some stones fell into the river and were replaced? And these are on the list, on the World Heritage list. But these are in a way obvious because they are already considered and accepted as the upper league in World Heritage. But most of our heritage sites are not World Heritage level. Most of them are quite common. Sometimes they might be even very simple, especially when it comes to urban heritage, where not each building on its own has cultural value on its own. If the building was standing alone, we wouldn't say that it's worth being restored or preserved. But when it stands in the context of historic city, yes, we say it. And then these buildings are quite simple. And many of them are used for not only for cultural purposes, of course, but for residential buildings. Not all of them are palaces, for commercial activities and so on. They all need maintenance. And here I come to, because finally I decided to speak about maintenance and in some way recycling buildings. We don't use the term recycling buildings, but the transformation of historic buildings into other functions and other uses. Now, every property, even our simple house, or not so simple for those who live in palaces, needs maintenance and needs cycling maintenance. Not every 15 or 20 years when things start to fall, but what is considered a cyclic maintenance means that we have kind of a user's manual saying that every so-and-so you have to look at certain things. Before every rainy season, you have to clean the gutters so the rain does not does not get into the walls or does not stand on the roof, especially when you have flat roofs. Many other issues which are part of cyclic maintenance. And when I say proper, it means that we do not bring some contractor from the street or somebody who builds buildings, but proper means that there is, it's accompanied, at least accompanied by someone who has training in conservation. I will get a little later to it, but there are so many sites, and I'm almost 50 years in the field, that if you think of just 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and many places still ongoing, the use of wrong materials just because we think, wow, there's a new material, it's going to save us. Beginning of the 20th century and very deep in the 20th century, and Portland cement, not based on based on natural materials, but going through industrial work, were used to repair and to build and so on historic buildings until we started to find out some people didn't like the color, which is great, but the color is not the problem. Portland cement has soluble salts in it, and they move into the bricks and into the stone and then to the surface. We found out that the thermal expansion of concrete, of cement, but Portland cement, is more than double than historic materials like stone. And then it started to push the stone, and stone started to fall off, and so on. So the proper materials and proper work are extremely important in conservation. But once we repeat the maintenance, and I do consider maintenance as preventive measure in conservation, whether it's, even if it's not a heritage building, but in protecting our places, once we do it, and some years later we redo it, in a way we are in restoring restoration, or maintaining something which has been maintained already, but few years later. And therefore, there's a very important issue of keeping documents, documenting what we have done. In a way, like in many other things, like in medicine and so on, and we are in the medicine of built heritage, of buildings, we have to keep record of what has been done, what was used, and how the work was done. And before the work, before redoing it, we have to document again. So these are some rules which have to do with the restoration. And if we just think of it, in reality, there are no old buildings. I don't want to say what does it mean old. At a certain age, you don't even know what is the definition of being old, or you don't want to know. So there are no real old buildings which were not maintained without becoming a ruin. archaeological ruin or another ruin. So if you don't want it to be a ruin, you have to maintain it. This brings me, it's not part of this talk, but to another issue. If you don't use a building, a heritage building, one of the very important things is to find the proper use for heritage building, because if it's not used, nobody will maintain it. Nobody will protect it. And finally, it will become kind of a ruin. I'm not talking about the first-class monuments which will be restored and maintained just because they're first class, like the Royal Palace or the Parliament building and so on, but about the millions of the more common heritage buildings. There are, in fact, buildings which survived, let's say, 100 years. They had to go through cycles of renovation, at least of the infrastructure. If you think of what kind of electricity we had 100 years ago, and in many places there was no electricity at all, or what kind of installations. I understand there's a heat wave now in Europe. In many places, there was no air condition for cooling air condition. Now you have to install it. And you have to install it in historic buildings. What kind of air conditioning? Where do you put the machinery? How do you convey the fresh air or cool air or warm, hot air? These are things which did not exist in many of the buildings. Sometimes you have a roof with a space where some of things can move there. But if we think of regulation, fire protection regulations, smoke detectors, sprinklers, how do we get them through wooden beams, decorated ceilings, walls, and so on? So if we do it, and we have to do it, we do some kind of change in the building. And that change has to be then later, it becomes part of the building. Unless there's new technology and we redo it, but then it's again restoring the already restored. That means, and that's what I in fact I want to say, there's no building which had no change and no kind of restoration, if we can call it change, because once you change it, you have to repair and you have to redo things. And I, as a freelance architect with an active firm in architecture, I have to deal with it almost every day. I was doing it for many, many years in archaeological sites, which are much easier in some way because they are not for use, they are for presentation, for teaching, education, and for tourism and so on. But still, even there, you need lights, you need safety. In the last years, we are talking more and more about accessibility for handicapped, for people who have difficulties, for people on wheelchairs, and so on. So that means we must install new elements on sites, which then become part of the site. Although we have rules, in the best case, they must be removable whenever and so on. But still, they become part of the site, and there's a maintenance now of everything together and restoration of a little bit different kind of site. Another issue, which I assume you also deal with it, it started mainly with structural issues of bearing loads of buildings, especially when they became public buildings which were not built for it. And they must carry a much heavier load. I always say that the biggest threat to build cultural heritage are the structural engineers, because it's their responsibility. When I had an argument with a structural engineer and I told him, I do not allow you to do it, he asked me, do you sign the plan? Are you responsible for the safety and so on? If I'm responsible, so then we have to reach reach solutions. And again, with the experience, all of us who have many years of experience in decision-making processes, we know that we have to reach very often compromises. Again, and I'm not talking about the first-class monuments where it's less common, but still we have to think of compromises. And too bad to say it, in every case, finally, the politicians that they are making the decisions, whether it's the mayor, the city council, or higher-level politicians. But still, we are the advisors. Okay, I spoke about the becoming ruins and some of these very, very common things which we are doing. Now, this miracle solutions like Portland cement, or much later the epoxy resins, which are the best possible glue which can hold everything. And at the beginning, nobody was really thinking, or even those who were thinking, we did not know exactly the structure of it. We do not know the long-term effect of epoxies. And sometimes we used epoxies which were, I can tell you, having effect on the color of stone, all kinds of effects. And the life, the length of their life was not known. Sometimes we have to redo them. We have to remove them. We have to remove some concrete and epoxies from historic buildings. Is part of the restoration of restorations. And there is a challenge when, especially when the materials are not reversible. And when you remove them, you cause damage to the original material. And when it was not done properly by professionals, then the difficulty is even bigger. Therefore, once we know the issues, sometimes we know how to handle it, and in most cases what's important, we should know what to ask and what to avoid. Now, the other big thing, and I want to present a specific building on which I was working for years and still working on it easier, and it's much easier to present cases through a real case. I thought of talking of two of them, but I think that one important building with many cases of restoration and changes will be a good case which all of us can have in mind, something they know, something they worked on, something they studied, and so on. And I will bring a case of a hospital which was built in Jerusalem, inaugurated in 1902. That means 120 years ago. I always joke about this building that if the first baby which was born in this hospital lives until 120, that baby will die this year. But probably nobody of those is still alive. I thought of speaking, and maybe I will mention it later, of the Prime Minister's office in Tel Aviv, which is a very important historic building, not because of the Prime Minister, but because its original function and who built it and so on. But I did not prepare visuals about this issue. So a little bit of history about this hospital in Jerusalem, just to give you a background. Until late 19th century, 1870s, so late 19th century, 1870s, the city of Jerusalem, which now has more than 1 million inhabitants, was a small town enclosed within Ottoman walls of the 16th century, very dense, as you can see from this early air photo. Big part of it is occupied by the Holy Sepulchre, by the way, is here, the Golgotha area, but the Temple Mount is here with a big mosque. The Wailing Wall is here, and it's divided since Roman time with the Cardo and the Cumanus to four quarters: the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, which is also Christian, and the Jewish quarter. Mountains and valleys all around. Only in the 1860s, there was first movement outside the city walls, which have gates, and the gates were locked every night. So everything was within the city, including whatever we can call hospitals in the 19th century. But the population started to grow, and the density of the city did not allow for a proper hospital towards the end of 19th century, when with modernization of medicine, and I always think of Semmelweis modernization of Röntgen, those big changes, certainly with the big plagues like the COVID, but from cholera to others of that time. And they need to hospitalize more people in more modern way. So there was no option of building a bigger hospital in the old city. And it was mainly the Jewish community at that time looking for location and funding for a new hospital. They've sent a few important persons from the local community of Jerusalem at that time to Germany to meet Jewish communities in Frankfurt and in Köln to convince them with the project and to get donations. Now, finally, the issue was more difficult than just having money. The issue was buying land. At that time, the Holy Land, Palestine at that time, is under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans did not allow foreign residents to purchase land, and most of the population, the Jewish population, was European, whether with Austro-Hungarian citizenship, Russian citizenship, and so on. Of course, they could not purchase land, but this was finally negotiated with the Sultan. I imagine that he got a lot of bribery and money to allow them to buy. Finally, in the 1890s, they found, if you want to know the scale, this is here the line of the city walls of Jerusalem. It's about one kilometer length. So they found land here in the blue circle around it, which was kind of almost 2 kilometers from the town. No roads. Well, there were carriage roads, but no proper roads. So if you think of nowadays ambulance doing the way from here to the hospital, most people would die on the way to the hospital, which would be very good for the statistics. Nobody dies in the hospital. That's great. But finally, they found this area here. This is a map showing the development of Jerusalem a long time until 1918, which is the end of the Ottoman Empire. Then it started to grow much faster under British rule. Next thing was to find a proper director for the hospital, who is a physician, a doctor. They found a young, ultra-Orthodox Jew from Frankfurt, Dr. Wallach, who moved, that was quite courageous to move at that time from Germany, from Köln, to move to Jerusalem, to a really famous and important place, but a small hole in the Ottoman Empire. And the next thing was to find a planner, an architect. At that time, the biggest developments in the Holy Land were by a group, a German Protestant group called the Templars, the German Templars, not the Crusader Templars. Most of them from Württemberg. And their religious leader preached in the churches, saying that the church lost its way. that instead of following the very simple life, very modest architecture of the first Christians, it moved to gold and decorations and so on. The other religious leaders in Württemberg in general, that's the pre-German Federation, they didn't like it and they expelled him from the church. He had a big community following him and they decided to come to the Holy Land with the belief that if they will come to the Holy Land, they will be followed by many others, including by Jews who will become Christians, convert to Christianity, and then the Messiah will come again. They settled in several places in the Holy Land, and of course one of them was Jerusalem, but there was one was a settlement near Tel Aviv of nowadays, but at that time it was quite far from Jaffa. One was in Haifa, which was the port. But that's another story, very interesting on its own. Even Karl May visited them, for those who still know who Karl May was. And this architect or engineer, at that time there was no separation, engineer-architect, his name was Theodor Sandel. He was a German Templar living in Jerusalem, buried in Jerusalem. He designed some of the important public buildings in the, of course, he was educated in Germany, so he knew what it means. And he had this doctor, Dr. Wallach, giving him the programmatic issues, how to design what he needs for a modern hospital. So as I told you already, everything, it was finally inaugurated in 1902, still under the Turkish regime, so the Pasha came and the Turkish flags, and we have photos, it was documented, quite interesting. It was considered the first modern hospital in the whole land. They brought X-rays or Röntgen, X-rays, machinery, and so on. And it existed, functioned as a hospital in the building, also as the most beautiful building. That's much more difficult to define, the most beautiful building, but also the most beautiful building in Jerusalem. Functioned as such until 1978. So 78 is 44 years ago. A very big percentage of people who were born in Jerusalem before 78 were born in this hospital, which was a general hospital for everything at that time. The hospital, the old building was too small for a modern hospital. It was already declared as a conservation, as heritage building, so changes were limited or difficult, and it was abandoned in a way. They built a new place, moved to a new place. There was no demand for the old hospital. Nowadays it would not stand empty for such a long time, but it was standing empty for almost 15 years, let's say, until it was purchased by the National Radio TV Authority. Now, of course, a radio TV authority needs in a building are different than what a hospital needs. They hired good local architects who did their best not to destroy what doesn't have to be destroyed, but imagine the need for complete new infrastructure, completely new, not only modern, but that fits the needs of radio and TV. And here I'm moving from the maintenance, which was also an issue, of course, to transformation of buildings and another transformation and so on. What do we do with the previous conservation, previous works, if they have value? The fact that the radio TV, National Radio TV, was in this building has an historic value. Maybe it doesn't have really architecture and so on, but having historic value, of course you can put it on a plaque and say, between these and these years, this building was used by by the radio TV. But what about the changes, the alterations in the building? And they were quite carefully done. But now I will show you some pictures of the building. Top left photo is when the building is not finished yet. So it's a pre-1902 picture when all the workers, I think, probably the workers are standing on the roof, unfinished. Many workers around, you can see the landscape, rocky landscape, that's Jerusalem. This is what was already then, but certainly much more, is the Jaffa Road, which means the road from the main port of the Holy Land, which was used mainly by pilgrims coming to the holy places in Jerusalem by boats, because they came from Jaffa. Jaffa was the main port of the country. Jerusalem was the main destination. It's about 65, 70 kilometers. The German Templars took care of part of the road. Then at the end of 19th century, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany visited the Holy Land, and they remade the road, and this was the main reason, not the comfort of the people who cared about people, but because the Kaiser came. So this is just before ending. This is a very romantic picture. You can see the working animals, which were camels. Those who were not in Israel yet might think that we still have camels everywhere. Well, we have to go to zoo to see camels, or to the desert where the Bedouins would still have camels. But otherwise, this is the Jaffa Road. This is the big hospital of Shaarei Tzedek. Shaarei Tzedek means the gate of the right way, of virtue, and so on. In some way, a little bit neoclassical with arches and very wide balcony at the entrance, which you may ask, why do you need in a hospital just such wide balcony? It's not a public building where the leader stands on the balcony and speaks to the I always think of Mussolini and others who speak to the people in the forum. But this is a matter of design, of course. Again, 1910, so 8 years after inauguration of the place. I'm not showing you pictures of, for example, that they have cows in the courtyard because they have to supply their own milk. So that, like in the best time, they have 20 cows. We have to remember that we are in an area which went through different wars. First World War, where the British commander came and got the surrender of the Turkish commander here in this building. It was the closest building to the entrance to Jerusalem, the closest big public building. And then Second World War, of course, then the Independence War of Israel, other wars, and the hospital was always used also for people injured and affected by the wars. But this is the beginning, and just some other romantic pictures of how, but a modern hospital. Remember, here is the operation table with the lights, with the bed. There are some pictures. This is children room, and you see these nets against mosquitoes and other flying animals, and children sitting in the middle. By the way, a very interesting thing which we are still looking for, almost above every bed, there was a plaque of somebody who donated the money. We don't know if during the restoration of the TV and radio, they covered it or removed it, but we found some of them in the storage of the new hospital, and they are on marble. They are not painted on the wall. So I'm looking for the next restoration of the building to look at whether these things are still in the walls. Now the building has vaults, but already beginning of 20th century, it has iron rails, ceilings. You see the sick people in the corridor. Quite interesting building. Now, just to see the view, it's not the most recent, but it's air view of the building. It has, which made it good, really usable for new users. Has parts which are flat roofs. Certainly, they were not good enough to carry loads of people if you want to use the roof, and I will come to the next function of the building. Jerusalem does not have its own water source, no springs in Jerusalem, and therefore collecting rainwater was always a big issue, certainly for hospital. Under this big courtyard, back courtyard, now you see here parking, but this was a beautiful garden for a long time until the radio. This is from the time of the radio and television. Under this big courtyard, there are huge water cisterns, which could contain thousands of liters of fresh water, rainwater, to be used by hospital. And during wars and during siege on Jerusalem in 1940, the hospital supplied water to all the people who are living around. Now, the radio TV were in this building until they came in 1998, and they were using the building for 15 years. 15 years later, they moved out. The building was again abandoned, but this time it was already protected, really protected monuments, so locked. And everywhere you have homeless people who are looking for a place to stay, but there were some guards around, but not really, because it is state property. It's not private property, so the state is the worst keeper of property, doesn't bring revenue and so on. And then a plan was prepared, a master plan was prepared, and this building is designated to become a hotel, a luxury hotel. With the designation, nobody was really thinking what will be the consequences for conservation, for preservation of the building. And now we are going through a third cycle of preserving what has been changed and preserved. I'm the conservation architect of the building. I refuse to be the hotel architect. I didn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of the submitting all kinds of plans, but nothing will go through without us preparing the proper conservation plans, overviewing the works and so on. And by the way, one of the very important, I think that I skipped a photo, and I will just go back to a photo. Yes, I told you that the director of the hospital is Dr. Wallach, director for 50 years, and he's buried nearby, was an ultra-Orthodox Jew. When he gave the orders to the German architect how to design what is needed for the hospital, he requested to have a synagogue on the main short axis. So the building had one long axis with corridor and one short axis. And here on the ground floor, there was a synagogue. The synagogue was a very important element, not only because of its religious function, which does not exist, but because of the symbolic meaning. And you see religious Jews praying here with the Torah ark and painted ceiling. During the radio period, the radio TV period, the ceiling, wall-painted ceiling, was restored and reconstructed some, but this is the original part, and it became the meeting room of the radio TV. Now, once it becomes a hotel, and the access will be from a floor in the bedrock below with elevators, where would the elevators come to? To the main axis, to the main lobby, which is a beautiful part of the building. This was my first big fight in this building, and those who know me personally know that I'm not really a religious person. And I said, no way, you are not going to use it as a lobby. You're not going to use it. You have to respect the historic and symbolic meaning of the place. And the architect told me, but you don't have a hat on your head. You are not religious. Why do you care? I told him, that's a matter of culture. It's not a matter of religion. It's culture. So we are going through a third cycle of renovation and changes of the building. And one of the big questions was, do we have to keep something of the radio TV period? They changed things. They needed better accessibility. They added elevators. They moved the staircase from one location to another one. They combined some rooms to make bigger rooms and so on. I believe that we have to, we should. It's part of the history of the building. Whatever is caused damage can be repaired, even if it's not 100% reversible. But we have, so we are, once the place will become a hospital, we will restore and redo some of the things to bring it back to, in some places, to the original phase. But being a hotel now, it will require, nearby, I will show you immediately a shocking 3D presentation of how the area is going to look. Not the building itself, but the whole area around. The developer got huge area around the hospital. And for them, the hospital or the Shaarei Tzedek place will become maybe the symbol of the place, something to attract people, but the small money for them, even for income. They are going to build, here I will show you the presentation. This is the historic building, which was preserved, but there are 3 or 4 towers of 40 floors towers around it. Some distance, some respect, but many people are, of course, against it, saying this is not Jerusalem. What is conservation if you build such buildings around it and so on? It reminds me of one of my early visits in Budapest, really liking very much the street of the embassies. And I think at that time, whether to Tamás Földi or András Román, what a beautiful street, beautiful villas and buildings. And I was told, you should have seen what was demolished in order to build these ones. But that's always the issue. Most of people do not see what used to be there. So once we are going to this phase, the question is, do we transform the building? And this is a transformational building through several functions. A hotel, they will need a swimming pool. So they wanted very much a swimming pool here on the roof. I said, no way, no way. Okay, they have new building, which will be also hotel, so the swimming pool will be in the other one. But they need a spa, they need luxury rooms, and so on. This will be the big challenge. And the big challenge in this case, is reuse, is adaptive reuse. It's not restoring, but this is our chance also to restore. Do we go back in time? Do we go to the time of the hospital? If possible, yes. I always say that schools, hospitals, prisons, and hotels are built in a very similar way. The services are different, but they're built with cells, classes, rooms. So whenever possible, we'll keep the original, even go back to some of the original plans. We have the original plans by Theodor Zandel. And do we keep traces of the different periods? Yes, if they're important enough, and so on. Of course, the hotel will need new infrastructure. Each room will need bathroom, toilets, that means pipes and so on. Cannot go with pipes through vaults. This will be a huge challenge, but I'm really looking forward. And it's a big challenge to have a building which is not archaeological ruin, keeps being a living building, important heritage, but is changing functions, changing needs, and of course going through historic periods must stand to modern standards of different standards. And this is our big challenge in the maintenance of such buildings first, then in restorations of different cycles. And as I said at the beginning, maintenance is also kind of restoration, and each cycle of maintenance is a restoration of the previous restoration. Thank you. This, for those who did not know him, this is András Román standing next to the pillar, and for me it's quite symbolic being a pillar in front of another pillar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much your presentation, and the floor is in this auditorium, and if somebody has any kind of question, the floor is yours. Akkor magyarul kérdezzünk.
Jön át egy tolmács.
Aki kérdez, azt kérném, hogy üljön ide, hogy és akkor megkapja ezt a... Nem kapta meg.
As some of you know, I understand some Hungarian, but not good enough.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you in Hungarian, and the interpreter is going to translate it. My question is, do you have... Yeah. Ja, ez kell, hanem azt kell. Jó, bocsánat. Szóval azt szeretném megkérdezni, hogy ugye hallottunk arról, hogy a zsinagóga megmentéséért komoly küzdelem folyt. Azt is hallottuk, hogy az épület bizonyos részleteit még a TV-székház idején lapostetőre változtatták, és tehát milyen részletek maradtak meg kontinuisan a mai napig? És akkor most mit csinál?
Okay, I will try to answer. I think I understood that you mainly asked what part of the original parts are still exist.
That's
mainly.
it.
Because of the look, even the synagogue as building, as an envelope, still exists. And when the hospital moved to a new place, they took the elements, the movable elements, the carpentry, which was beautifully carved carpentry of the synagogue, to the new place, not using it, and I hope we will get it back, but more as a museal elements representing what used to be there. Most of the rooms remain as were. The big, some changes were using gypsum, light walls, but the main aspect will be removing probably some kilometers of wiring, of pipes, of electricity, and installing new ones. The radio television, they removed the old roofs and cast the new roofs in concrete and wooden structure under tiles. This will remain. Visually, it looks the same, but there will be big fights. I can tell you, for example, that now I'm a little bit upset that I refuse to be the architect, because I have to fight not only with a new function but with another architect who wanted to install stairs through the lobby of the building, which is at the entrance. First, he wanted it to be through the synagogue because there's a difference in levels between the Jaffa Road and the courtyard behind it. And he wanted to connect them. I told him, no way, you cannot. Of course, I knew that this will not pass. Even if I say yes, it will be the last time I'll be working on conservation, because it will not get the agreement of the city council would agree, because they are local politicians, but the regional council would reject it. They still want a skylight and so on, and I'm trying to minimize it. But most of the building is still in its original phase, just replastered, repainted. In some places, there's a big new staircase, which to make the new staircase made of iron, steel, and wood, they had to demolish several rooms of the hospital. Now, of course, for the hotel, what is more important is the rooms. So this part will be reconstructed according to the original plans, which is another question in ethics of conservation, whether if you reconstruct the building using the original plans, if it's proper, if it's still worth, it's still cultural heritage. But that's another philosophical issue. So most of it is original. Entrance gate was changed, and we're going to redo to give it more symbolic value. I told you about the water cisterns. We went down into the water cisterns. They are huge. They are about 8 meters deep, and they have cross vaults. Beautiful. You go in. We went in with ropes into a boat because there's still water in there. Most of it is cut in rock. So there's a question what to do with them. I want one of them, at least one of them, to be accessible to public, to show a huge water system and to use it as visitor center of the place, the history of the place. It looks like cathedral, but very romantic one, with roots of trees coming through it will be much less romantic when we restore it, but that's part of the destiny. So water systems will be also used and restored. Okay.
Igen, magyarul. Mindegy. Szóval még azt szeretném kérdezni, ha én jól értem, akkor a különböző funkcióváltások, azok tükröződnek az építészeti, vagy a funkcióhoz csatlakozó építészeti megoldáshoz, és egyúttal, mint egy építészettörténeti, vagy egy funkciótörténeti képeskönyv is használható az épület. Gondolok itt a vízellátásra, gondolok itt a különböző átalakításokra, tehát hogy úgy is lehet tekinteni, mint az építéstörténet képeskönyve, mármint az épület.
I'm not sure I understood everything, but some terminology. Yeah.
Akkor most mit csinálják? Magyarul mondjam? Ja, hogy angolul. Aha. So, as I understood, this building could be considered as a documentation of the history of different function of original buildings. Am I right?
Yes, but it will function as a hotel.
Yes, we understood.
Yes. So functioning as a hotel, first it must stand to all the standards of modern hotel.
Yeah.
Which is a huge, yes, okay.
But beside, as much as is possible. It showed us the history of functional changing of this original hospital, yes?
Yes, yes. And there the question is, where is it going to be? What functions cannot be in this building? And luckily, because the developer has the other buildings around, if there will be no kitchen and no restaurant in this building, they can be in the others. So some of these functions, we have a solution in another building. But of course, for the safety, fire safety regulations, all the modern regulations, we do have special regulations for historic buildings where it is not as strict. I don't know whether you have it. It is not as strict as in new buildings. So, for example, if it's not a matter of life and death, we will not make the railing, of the height of a railing, to the new standard of 110 centimeters. It will remain 90.
Yeah.
For example, accessibility will be done not according to the full modern standards, but we will calculate it. What will make it easier for public, for the users, but not 100% to the standards. It's already being discussed technically because some of it, the long corridors are all vaults. You cannot cross the vaults with pipes and so on. But there are other places where so it's a challenge of almost every centimeter.
And you try to find some balance between modernization or changing of function and keeping the values of original parts. May I?
Yes. Yeah, there is a consensus about it. Yeah. Really, a full consensus. Of course, the developer wants more, but because it's considered a first-class monument.
Yeah, and a quite different question. Where is this site where András standing?
It's in Hungary. It's in Hungary, so I don't remember.
We are arguing about the site itself, and where do you remember where it was?
It could have been in Page, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. During that meeting of the ICOMOS Hungary, ICOMOS Israel, we traveled.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's in the south, yes.
Okay, I give the floor for somebody. To Tamás.
So thank you, Gyula. I think it was really good, and it's always very helpful to select a concrete property in a particular place. So it was really very good. My question was partially you already gave answer that there is a possibility some new functions to solve in another building. But my question was, is there any strong intention of the developer to connect physically those buildings or those functions outside this protected building? Because it's always a challenging task how to build, how to construct this kind of connection. At least in Hungary, in our climatic situation, the context is always a strong, expectation of developers. Please do it in a covered place, in something like this. So that was my question.
Yes, well, I should have shown the plans for the place. Yes, there is in the plan there is a connection between this building and one of the towers, which will be a hotel and will serve. They will work together. Luckily, but this is a big challenge for the structural engineers, luckily it is all standing on rock, and the rock in this place has a slope, as I said, from one area to the other, from Jaffa Road to the back. So the plan is to dig the rock in fact, to cut it. Nowadays, we cut it with saws. To cut the rock and create a connection underground. So there'll be an underground tunnel connecting between the building, not visible from surface.
Excellent. So it's always a big challenge. If you have constraints, it's always a possibility to use it. It's an advantage. So congratulations. But I do believe that it's still going to be quite a hard job to find a final good solution. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You. And my best wishes also to Rachel.
Thank you. She hears us.
So my question is about the acceptance of these tower buildings near the hospital. What is the local people's opinion? What is the local people's approach to these buildings in this historical context? This new construction will significantly influence the appearance of this old historic building.
Yes. Well, a very, very good question. Although it's not about restoration or restoration, so I did not speak about it. But it's a huge fight. Most people do not like it. The city authorities love it because it will bring more revenue, taxes, and so on. The city is growing and is always a battle. Where are you going to grow? You don't want to destroy the other environment farther away of the mountains and hills. So you have to grow in height. But in this case, yes, there is also a question. What is the meaning of, in this case, because it's a first-class monument, it's okay. But if it was a little more simple, like many of these neighborhoods here, what is the meaning of preserving them if you change the whole environment and you build these high towers? I can tell you that originally, even it was planned for 20 floors, which is also very, very high. And in some places, well, in Israel, we still call six floors a tower. But the developer here, with influence of politicians, got the permit to build 40 floors. And I'm afraid they will get it. People hate it. People oppose it. And in our system, you have 60 days to submit your opposition against the plan. But most of it was not accepted. So unfortunately, I believe that these towers will probably be built. Maybe not all of them, maybe. But there's a big opposition. And I'm not talking, as you also asked, I'm not talking only about the professionals. Professionals who are in cultural heritage, who are all against it. But about the people around it. They don't want it. But that's in some way it's a story of renovation of historic cities and so on happens everywhere. I don't like it, certainly. Although the developer is my client, he knows that I don't like it.
No, there is no other question, and thank you very much, your cooperation and your participation in your summer course. And we're so sorry that we couldn't meet you in face-to-face, but we wish you all the best, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you.